Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to New Yorkers for Safer Streets' latest Fireside Chat with New York City elected officials. I'm Courtney Metakis.
And I'm Sara Lebwohl. We'll be moderating this conversation tonight.
A couple of just things to note. We are being joined tonight by Manhattan Borough President Gale Brewer. She's running a few minutes late because she's an incredibly busy woman who is coming to us from a, believe it or not, at 8 o'clock. She already had another meeting that is running a few minutes late, so she should be with us momentarily. Thanks for hanging in. She's got an incredibly busy schedule, which is one of the reasons we are so very lucky to have her with us soon this evening. A little bit about our organization while we wait. We were founded in October of 2019 by a group of moms following a shooting near a playground on the Upper West Side. Since then, we've grown to include thousands of members from all over the city. And our mission has remained the same, which is to build a safer, more livable New York City by educating and empowering families, encouraging our leaders to seek evidence-based, effective solutions to some of the problems confronting our city, and also through forums like this to help mobilize New Yorkers to vote. So thank you all for joining us. One of the things that I think has happened since the global pandemic hit is that it's really trained a spotlight on so many of the concerns upon which our group was really founded. So it's really kind of started to highlight many of the issues that we've been talking about since October and really brought them to the forefront for a lot of people who I think maybe hadn't been quite as aware of them before COVID-19. So the other thing that it's done is made it critically important to address some of these issues as we look forward to recovery. So this is actually the second in our Fireside Chats. We also are doing a candidate forum, which I think some of you who signed up probably saw some of those as well. Please continue to sign up and follow us for more information on that. But we're really excited about these Fireside Chats, and we think it's really an extension of some of the work that was happening behind the scenes since October, with a lot of the leadership committee going and meeting with elected officials and really taking that opportunity to make sure that our voices were heard and really push elected officials and get those moments to get to ask questions. And we've been really happy with those opportunities, and it's really exciting. Ironically, the move towards everybody moving online and onto Zooms has meant that so much of what was happening in the elected officials' offices now gets to happen on Zoom from the benefit of our homes, and you get to see all of our family pictures in the background. And had you been on a few minutes earlier, you would have seen my two children as well. So we're gonna hold here for a moment. Hang with us while we wait for Borough President Brewer to join us. Sarah, you look like you also have some, I don't know if you're about to get a child crashing through the door.
We can do
Mine are making some noise.
We may get that.
You're
going to see that door. But no, hopefully I think she's sleeping. But we have a number of topics that, Courtney and I have spent the past couple of days really trying to tailor, because we have a group of, just in our Facebook group alone, 3,000 plus people who really care about a number of topics that have impacted our daily life in the city. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are on the fence. Do I stay? Do I go? What do I do? Some people have already left the city. Some people that are still there are thinking about, what is my move? What is the city going to look like after this? And some people may have been on the fence even before this happened because of rising crime rates, homeless encampments around the city, a number of issues that are affecting day-to-day life in the city. So we have a really great list of questions that have come in from our members. And yeah, Courtney and I have had a really good time.
Thank you for those of you who submitted them. Yes.
Yeah, while we're waiting, thank you to all of you, because a lot of the questions, so that you know, we have read them all, and we sometimes try to group them. There was a lot of similar themes. So I can give you a quick preview while we're waiting. Budget questions, for example, we'll be talking about what recovery looks like with a lot of budget cuts that have happened. There are many key services like small businesses, education, police and fire department overtime. How are we going to be able to cover all of these very important services that we all depend on with budget cuts coming that may have already been struggling in the first place? So we really want to talk to Gale about that, because that is her area of expertise. Mm-hmm. She will be really the most knowledgeable. You'll be hearing it really first, because she knows more than anything that you can even read online.
I think the other thing that's important, I think the other thing that's really kind of interesting when we started to have these conversations, both before COVID-19 and since, I think what really happened was that in the last few months, and then especially with COVID, so much of the conversation that people were having one-on-one, you know, with a couple of their friends in passing, really became something that we realized everyone was asking. Everyone was talking about, that it was something that was really at the forefront for a lot of people's minds. And I think what's really interesting in this, and getting to see everyone's questions was, reminded me of this, that the fact that we had, before we started this, when we started talking to the borough president's team, we kind of talked about, okay, here's some broad topics that we suspect people are going to be interested in. And then when the questions come in, they reflect those concerns. So it's really another kind of reminder that we are all talking about, thinking about, and here she is, and thinking about the same questions, which we will be talking about with Manhattan Borough President Brewer, who I think is logging in now. I think Borough President Brewer, can you hear us?
I can hear you very clearly. Thank you.
Wonderful.
I was in East Harlem a few minutes ago. I mean, funny, you know, virtually. And they're not over yet, so I was a little sorry, I was a little late. That's what happened.
It's no problem. We understand. It is tough. It is remarkably tough to schedule these. Everyone's schedule has started to go late into the evening.
We don't go very far, but yes.
Yeah, we don't go very far, but we go for a long time. So thank you for joining us. We gave a little bit of an introduction about who we are. And a little bit more about who you are. We were talking to some of the people online about the fact that our group grew out of some concerns about making sure that this city is a safe and a livable city, and that we're really interested in empowering and educating families. And these forums are a really wonderful opportunity to see, for everyone to get a glimpse into what we were doing when we met with your team and other elected officials in the past few months. And we're really, really, really excited to have you here to talk with us tonight. And so thank you for that. We really appreciate you joining us after such a jam-packed day.
Well, that's okay. I know everybody's trying. We're all in the same situation, so I appreciate it. I hope I can be helpful. I know your group very well, and I know how much work you do and how impactful it is and how stressful it is. So I appreciate it.
Great, wonderful.
Well, let's get started with some of the topics. I was just telling our group right before you joined that you are really the budget expert. And right now, New York City's Independent Budget Office released an analysis saying that the mayor's budget underfunded some key areas. We were talking about homeless services, education, small business services, police and fire department overtime. All of this will require money that won't be included in, smaller amount in the budget. Can you give us an update on where we stand on funding these essential services and where you think our priorities should be?
Well, it's very hard. I mean, I was in the council for 12 years and on the budget committee and chaired the Manhattan delegation. But I think everybody is feeling, when I was just with, in the East Harlem group and earlier, I don't know if it's up to 8 billion on the city level and I don't know, 17 billion on the state level. And there are bills in the Congress, House only, not the Senate, that would help with municipal and state revenue in terms of filling some of these gaps. The city, as you know, has a law that says you have to fill the gap. And I know there's a lot of friction going on between the mayor and the governor. That's been in the papers. And I think the governor is feeling that if he's going to give more money to the city for anything, he wants to do some kind of a financial control board, which we had in the past. But just so you know, it's not only the budgets, it's also the frictions. There's what comes from or doesn't come from Washington. But given all of that, obviously the East Harlem group that I was with a few minutes ago is interested in housing. And you have the same challenges. You didn't mention that, but I know that's on your list somewhere. Just in terms of whether it is the June 20th or August 20th date, depending on which executive order you're looking at from the governor, and they're both very complicated. You don't have to pay rent, it's a moratorium, but you don't have to pay rent, because eventually it's going to be due. And so then the question is, you know, you have somebody has to pay the mortgage and the banks will, like a vicious cycle. So then the question is, what's the priority? How do you get, the rent has to be paid. So then does it come from the federal government? Because there is in the House bill some money for that, has to pass the Senate. Or does it come as $100 million as we speak? Literally, they're sitting in their offices in Albany talking about $100 million bill that would help for renters. I think commercial and residential, but I'm not sure, definitely residential. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I can talk more specifically. Everything is in more flux than I or you or anybody could ever imagine, and everybody has a priority. The first priority that came out of the budget in terms of don't cut was the summer youth employment program. And last year, 75,000 young people, highest ever, I think it was $124 million paid for that wonderful program. And the mayor cut it completely. I know the city council will put it back in quotes because it won't be the whole thing. And as we speak, whether it's the Police Athletic League or nonprofits are trying to figure out how they can do some private fundraising. And the state has money. They put in 22 million in the governor's budget, but, and it sits there because now it's just talking about legislation. So the state budget is done, at least for now. There could be amendments. The state will only put the money in if the city puts the money in. So you can see, and 22 million doesn't add up to 124 million. So you got that's an example of just one example of something. Now, when you talk about education and homelessness, so the education budget is huge. We work every single day with the schools in Manhattan. We were on the Zoom today with the executive superintendent and all of her staff. What anybody should want is not to cut in the classroom. That should be the first priority. And I think there's a lot of, like you said, you mentioned the Independent Budget Office. They did a somewhat, it wasn't in-depth because they just didn't have the staff to do it, but they did look, because every principal tells me that we as a city should make cuts at 52 chambers. And when I say 52, it could be Livingston Street, Brooklyn, but you get the point, the central office and not in the classroom. So that would be the goal. And I think that's what I don't know that that's the mayor's goal. I don't know if the chancellor's goal. I know it is the chair of the education committee's goal. But you have to know, having been in the city council for 12 years, even though you're chair of a committee, you get listened to, but you're not in the room making those final decisions. So I think that the education budget absolutely should even be increased in the classrooms, because I don't know what's going to happen in September. There are 178,000 kids going to summer school, and they're going virtually. That's a big number that didn't get the support or weren't able to complete. So I guess you could look at that and say, is that what it's going to look like in September if we don't have more support? And I'm a big supporter, as you know, of social workers. in every school. And I think you need it now more than ever. And that costs money. But the mayor's talking about cutting $300 million from the school budgets. And that would be, in my opinion, a huge mistake. Better to take money. And it sounds very, you know, grandiose. Cut from the consultants, cut from administrative, which I mentioned. But, you know, there are challenges. When I speak to administrators, I ask, why the hell do you need a consultant for something? And the answer is because between the Office of Management and Budget and Human Resources, I can't get certain numbers of people hired, and they're mandated. You know, you have many people at Department of Education, either for the special ed children or in general, who are mandated to be there. But then because he can't get the city to hire quickly enough, they end up going, goodness knows how much more, hiring through the private sector and a consultant. Both cases, people are qualified, but you know darn well it's going to cost a lot more on the private sector. So DOE is a big challenge, and believe me, it's hard to get the information. So I think if you could say what would be anybody's advocacy, would be to follow what the chair of the Education Committee, Councilmember Traeger, says is you absolutely have to cut the consultants and the administrators, and for God's sake, figure out the efficiency of hiring somebody who is then part of DOE and not a consultant. I don't know. I mean, that's it's a very big challenge. I mean, we've always had the issue of children with IEPs going to private school at vast cost because we don't have city schools to take their needs into consideration. In terms of homeless, I mean, I have less of a handle on it. This is one of those issues that when you are not in the field, I have to say it's much harder to get a handle on it. So we obviously have, I don't know, 60,000. Then you have 3,000 or 4,000 on the street, and then you have COVID. So I'm a little unclear, to be honest with you. There are lots of hotel rooms. Every time we meet with Steve Banks, again, meet virtually, it's not a great situation because the city is very stringent with phone calls, and you know, you don't get to ask this many, and it's not a back and forth. I could pick up the phone and call them anytime. I'm aware of that, but it doesn't help with the policy issues. So obviously the budget is huge for a homeless situation. I see more and more encampments on the street. That's what I see.
Yeah.
And I see more and more people. Yeah, I see a lot of encampments.
So as you're talking about this, just keep in mind, we really have a very deep concern about this particular issue. A lot of our members have asked about the homeless encampments and what can be done to help the people on the streets right now.
Yeah, because it's helping, and then you need the long term. I mean, so I think what's happening, is that people are being going into hotels if it's overcrowded in the shelter. These are mostly the men, to be honest with you, because there are a lot more men than women. And then what I was thinking that should happen was that they should stay in the hotel until there's permanent housing. Why the hell do you ask people to return to the shelter even if it's not crowded? Because then you're not, or if you're on the street, why in the world do you suggest that they go to a shelter? Because you know they're not gonna go from the hotel. And what exactly did happen from the individuals who were in the subways, who very few numbers, it seems to me, went to the hotels. Because if they did, then they might want to then go to a permanent supportive housing. We just don't have enough supportive housing. That's the other problem. Because most of these individuals probably wouldn't survive in a regular apartment. They need the supportive housing. So I think one of the issues is, it really does come down, just like the coalition says, to more supportive housing. And I am very frustrated with DHS. Sometimes when people in communities are willing and want to work with them, it's often, they say, we want transitional. And we say in the community, for goodness sakes, we will work with you on permanent supportive housing, but don't give me housing where people are coming and going. We want people to be permanently in this neighborhood. That's a big fight. There's one going on right now, right near Columbia, with a building where the owner's willing to do that. And the city says, no, we're gonna transitional housing. So we're going to fight because we want permanent, supportive housing. So in terms of your encampments, we will certainly be glad to work offline and figure out where they are and try to get those individuals into the hotels and then try to get them into permanent housing because they're not going to go to a shelter. And there's also something called safe havens, which are less restrictive, coming and going, so you are not as resistant to going there. So I'll be glad to do that. We've done it in a couple of cases and been successful, but you know, it's challenging. I don't know. I mean, those were the two topics. Tell me, I'm sorry, I didn't hear your third topic. Oh, small business, was it? I didn't remember what your other one was. Was it the small business?
Yeah, so small businesses and the police and fire department over time.
Okay. Well, small business, the issue there is that I called early on, I must admit, because the business improvement districts are the ones who are begging for open space. On Columbus Avenue, they're asking, on Broadway, they're asking, and down in the Flatiron district, they're asking, Midtown, meatpacking, everywhere. And usually it's the bicycle and pedestrians, but it's the business people because they need outdoor space or they're not gonna make it. Because you know as well as I do, if you have just allowed to have 25% of your, or I don't even know if it will be 50% in your space, then you're not going to make it. You need the outdoors. And they do it in Europe. There's lots of places in Europe where this is done. And it could be for a certain time period and then reevaluate. So I'm very supportive because I don't want to lose the small business. There's lots of problems. What happens if you have a bus lane? What happens if you have a bike lane? How do you handle that? And how do you have that space? In some cases in Europe, if there's a plaza nearby and they cordon off certain areas, I know they do this in Germany and say, this is this restaurant and this is this restaurant. I know that sounds kind of like, how can we possibly do that? But we sure have to think differently about the open space that we have. There is an issue because, of course, when you have open space, then you have noise, you have drinking, and it can be very disruptive to people in the neighborhood. But I don't know what else to do if we are going to make sure that our mom and pop, I am known for hating chains and chain restaurants I hate. So I want to make sure that our mom and pops are able to do that. So we have something called Street Seats program, which basically, you know, you remove a parking space and put in like a parklet and some seating. That could be part of what we're talking about in order to open up, and not forever, if that's the wish of the community. But those are suggestions that have caught on and that people feel would be helpful to the businesses in the community. And all of the bids are supportive. So, and of course you want open streets for just walking and bicycling. Many of the open streets still have cars or deliveries going at 5 miles an hour. Not everywhere, but that makes a big difference. I think that is, it's not been completely done yet, but I know that there is a lot of discussion about that kind of opportunity. And interestingly enough, it's definitely the businesses that are asking for that. So far, the mayor has opened, just in terms of open streets, not necessarily for restaurants, 40 miles. And there's still a hope for another 60 miles of open streets. That's a budget issue, but it's not as great as taking care of the homeless, the housing, and education, which you mentioned earlier.
Great. Well, just to follow up quickly on the small business, I want to jump ahead a little bit because you were just touching on it too. Safety concern of social distancing as we open the streets up. One of our members, Gabriella, wrote in and asked what can be done as we open up these, you know, she wants to see more open streets. What's the plan to open the streets? But also we have to keep in mind, you know, safety and social distancing. Can you tell us your perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, I've been impressed if you're working with the bids, and there's not a bid everywhere, or if you're working with the Chamber of Commerce, and there's not a Chamber of Commerce everywhere. On the west side, they obviously, Columbus goes up to 86th Street. Lincoln Square is in the Lincoln Square area. And obviously you have the Columbus, Amsterdam. So you have areas that have and areas that don't. Where there is a bid, I can promise you, certainly along Columbus Avenue, there will be a lot of positive, I would call them ambassadors or people who are hired by the bid to make sure that people are socially distancing. And the restaurants are owned by people, not owned, but the owner of the buildings are all members of the bid, almost 100%. So that's, I think, something that's very manageable. And the bids have said, we want to manage it. When you don't have a bid and you don't have a chamber of commerce, like on Amsterdam, where there's a lot of restaurants and some rowdiness sometimes, or on Broadway, where there are less restaurants, but on Amsterdam there are some. I think it would be incumbent on all of us to work with non-police ambassadors. Now that could actually be community board members if necessary. We all have to think of different ways we can participate. Because what we don't want is what you see in some of the East Side restaurants recently, where people are gathering and no social distancing and very few masks, to be honest with you. So I think it has to be somewhat because you don't want the police, I don't want to see the 2-0 or the 2-4 having to do that. So the mayor has hired for the parks, not hired because they're city employees, 2,500 people. And it's made a huge positive difference. And it's, I'm not saying it's working 100%, but I can tell you that people are listening more carefully and wanting to be more supportive than if the cops come. So I think your question is a good one. I think we have to I am on the governor's recovery task force for the 5 boroughs, along with the other borough presidents and labor and Kathy Wild and the speaker. And we meet every day at 2 o'clock, meet with the I would say virtually, and we talk about retail, restaurants, and what it looks like with the schools and the open spaces, etc. And we're very close to opening in New York City. We're just 2 points away from what we need in terms of one of the 7 criteria, and that's the hospital capacity. So it's going to be quite soon. I don't know exactly when, and there are obviously 4 different phases. And so the restaurants are not in the first phase, but there are, it's going to be challenging to keep people safe. And so I think we have to think about the restaurants, like I said, but also, like you said, the safety issues.
Yeah, thank you for that. One more question before I turn it over to Courtney.
Sure.
Speaking of safety, crime has been down overall, but in certain categories, notably burglaries, particularly among shuttered stores, which we really, we're just talking about the small businesses and other businesses in the community. What are your thoughts on how to handle enforcement here, particularly as we enter the summer months, which traditionally there has been an uptick in crime? One of our members was wondering, I'm worried about the burglaries on the Upper West Side and around the city. What can we do to address the issue?
Well, I assume, I mean, it's not only, I'm just saying it's such a strange experience because pollution is way down. And my husband has lots of respiratory, things that he has. And so it's so much easier for him to breathe. And so now we're going to have the cars back and the trucks back. And we're going to have a different kind of burglary and crime. I don't know. I do know that with eyes on the street, you have less store burglary, but then, when you have people, right now, I assume that the people who are robbing us are realizing that we're not out and about, we're home. So they're not out and about at all. Most of the unfortunate circumstances you hear about are personal, either the gang situation, or people who have personal horrible beefs with each other. But there has been burglary of cars, that's up, and also of property. So what we haven't been doing is leaving our pocketbooks on the chair when we go to the bathroom at Starbucks, which is beyond me to understand why people do that. But they do, or go get a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So, I think we have to be very clear about the way in which we operate once we quote unquote come back. I can't tell you, I'm sure that burglaries in stores that you have described will go down, and the people aren't moving their cars, so I assume robbers think that's a good opportunity. That will change, but I don't want people to get hurt, and I don't want individuals to get hurt either. So the bad news is people are not working, and they are desperate in some situations. So I worry about it, to be honest with you. I don't know. I think people need to be more vigilant than ever on the Upper West Side and elsewhere, because if you have 40% unemployment in terms of filing for unemployment, and then you have a huge unemployment number, bigger than ever, 13, 14%, then you really do have to realize that people are going to be desperate to get money. So I would say, I think we have to be much more vigilant than we were in the past, and that we have to work hard on the summer youth employment program, because you do want young people to have money for school in the fall, but you also want to have some kind of structured summer. So those are two really important issues as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, thank you so much, Borough President Brewer. I'm going to turn this back over to Courtney to ask a few more questions. We really appreciate your time.
I appreciate all you're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, Courtney, go ahead.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, Courtney.
Hi. Thank you so much. First, I just want to say I'm so glad you mentioned the Summer Youth Employment Program was going to be something we asked about. We had heard going into this when we were talking to officials about how do we help youth, and how do we also fight back against sort of some of the youth on youth violence we were seeing. That was one of the programs that had been highlighted to us that was important. So I'm glad to hear you talk about that. I think one of the major questions we were getting over and over, and it really is another key to reopening, is the plan for schools. So we know that some of these decisions will need to be made as we get closer, but we got so many questions on this topic. Can you give us some insight into what is being talked about, considered? Do you feel like officials are looking at different approaches, brainstorming creative solutions to how we approach getting kids back into school, whether that's in person, distance learning, a combination? What are you hearing, and what is being discussed?
Well, I have to say the first thing is, we mentioned earlier, is making sure that there's enough money in the classroom, whether it's virtual or in person, because that's a disaster if we don't have that. Now, I know the following. I mean, again, we talk constantly to DOE officials. We also talk to the CEC officials, because we appoint some of them for every one of the 6 boards in the Borough of Manhattan. So we have regular meetings with them. And then I just spent, a great deal of time talking about summer school with officials this past week. And then today we were on the phone with the head of executive superintendent and her staff. So there's many aspects to it. I don't know, other than the summer, which is 100% virtual, although there were some parents who were understandably quite concerned if they have a child with an IEP and many disabilities. Not to be in person is very, very challenging for that individual. So I'm concerned about that. But the summer is challenging enough. I've been working with JCC, and they have 200 trained, vetted DOE volunteers. People have been vetted by DOE, and we're going to try to hook them up with families that need support on the tech. Just as an example of one aspect of something that I want to see done, and I'm going to look for more volunteers. Of course, getting this through DOE, I'm not going to say anything, it's just challenging, but we're going to figure it out, because I can, even just talking to friends of mine, my kids are older, but talking to friends of mine with a first grader this morning, and how the virtual is or is not going, you need help. And even this is a smart guy with, his wife is a teacher, his parents are teachers, and it's still challenging. So I worry that come September, I don't know if we're going to be virtual, part virtual. I know that the custodians, because I know a lot of custodians are sanitizing each and every school because they don't know, they just assume it'll be open. I know that the technology, as I've been saying for 20 years, chairing the Technology Community Council, come from the tech community, wasn't great to start with. And even though we've been giving out laptops or iPads, I know that it has been very challenging on many levels. Not enough bandwidth, not enough broadband, and not enough expertise from teachers sometimes and or students. So I think the answer to your question is, if it is partly virtual and partly in class, which I don't know why I think that, but that's kind of what I think, or all virtual, because I can't see it being all in school, particularly with this new god-awful virus that is hitting children. And it'll be up to the governor, I think, to make the decision that we are going to see, have to see more support for families who are particularly challenged in terms of having the resources to be able to teach their children at home. Don't forget, June 20th is the deadline in some cases for paying the rent, July 1st, and in some cases it's September 1st. So you got all of that happening in the home with this huge number of people who may not be able to pay the rent, and they're going to have to be in court, or they're going to be having to talk to lawyers, or taking days off from work. And then if you have to go to work, then what's going to happen to your kids? So it's and the child care issues generally, not just to mention the school issues. So I don't know if I've been clear. I can say right now, to the best of my knowledge, nobody has decided what happens in September.
Do you feel like we're ensuring that the families in underserved communities have what they need? And I mean this very, very broadly. Do you feel like that's something that's being made a priority?
I don't. I know that they don't. How about that? I'm absolutely clear that they don't. And I know that if you ask DOE individuals and not some public relations press release, how many people have actually gotten served, there'll be much less than that, whatever it is, 87% attendance or some crazy number that I know is not correct. And I know that there are whole legions of people, young people, who never ever checked in since the pandemic started and since the schools closed. I'm not going to give you those numbers, but I know that they exist. So that's what I'm going to try to do with some of the wonderful folks at JCC in my small way on the Upper West Side and other schools in Harlem. And then we're going to also try to work. We can't get names of families specifically, but if you give me a general address at the New York City Housing Authority, I can find anybody. So I'm going to try to, with staff, we're going to try to find families that have not checked in, because DOE has not been able to do that. So, and then of course you have the technology and the challenges at home. Yeah, the technology and the challenges at home are very, very extensive. And I think they need a lot more support. That's why I love the social workers. I think we need to go to the families' doors and knock on them and see what can we do to help.
Are parents going to have the opportunity to choose whether they want to keep their kids at home?
Yeah, I don't know.
We had that question from one of our members.
Yep. I honestly don't know, Courtney. It's sort of like, I don't know how much is the state and how much is the city, but I'm sure these discussions are taking place, but I don't know the answer.
So I think,
like I said, I don't think it's going to be, I don't personally think it's going to be 100% in school, but I don't know more than that.
So we received, just to shift gears really a little bit, we received a number of submitted questions about how you think that the city and the city officials did in terms of their response to the COVID-19 crisis. So just kind of thinking big picture, I mean, in hindsight, how do you think New York City did? And then the flip side of that is looking ahead. Are there opportunities, are there lessons that we can take from this about what worked or didn't, and opportunities to really imagine or improve our city? So kind of that, looking back, how did we do? And looking ahead, what can we learn? What can we take from this?
Well, we can always do 2020, but one of the issues, and I don't know how much it's national, state, and city, is the lack of PPE. And I know it was hard to get a mask even for me, not to mention thousands of New Yorkers. And yet we were told originally, don't wear a mask. That was a mistake. And I mean, I think we can come up with a whole list of problems that were not addressed. We obviously did not close down early enough. We didn't have PPE. Somewhat is the federal lack of stockpile, and somewhat was, you know, we were not ready. And of course, we didn't have enough ventilators. We didn't have enough face shields. I remember in, you know, those days, like calling manufacturers and begging the Economic Development Corporation to hire people in the garment center to do some of these things. And companies were calling from all over the world, most of them bogus. They say they have masks, and of course they didn't. So terrible situation. I mean, you can't imagine the number of phone calls that the state and city economic people got about, I have masks, and it was a total lie. People looking for money. But they didn't, you know, it took months or weeks maybe to get anything from China, because that's where the masks were. And I think in the end, we ended up making some. We did more gowns here, but of course people died, and that's the worst part. Ventilators, I was not as involved with that. So I think the answer to your question, when you say where we closed too late and we didn't have enough PPE, and we were not, California, from what I read, seemed to have done a better job of it. But again, I'm not intimately involved with what happened there. One of my kids is out there, but he seems fine no matter what, so I don't know. I would say that in terms of and you know, the hospitals were overrun. I don't know how we could have gotten more beds faster, but of course, if we had closed fast earlier, then maybe we would have seen the hospital situation sooner. I don't know. Lessons learned, there are tons of them. If you talk to community of color, understandably, because of the healthcare system in the past, and you know, we've had the situation with the Central Park today or yesterday, with the woman and the bird watcher, and you basically hear correctly, we don't want to be like we were in the past. We want to have better healthcare. We want to have a better relationship with the cops and less racist situations. If I was to say what lessons, I mean, definitely stockpiling whatever we need in terms of keeping us healthy, just the raw materials. And then and of course, the second issue is figuring out how families who are overcrowded, the housing situation is the hardest issue to fix, even harder than the schools, even harder than the transportation. But many families got sick because they're so overcrowded. So how do you deal with this housing situation? That's a lesson, because when you're that crowded, you're going to get sick. And then the other lesson is how do you, I would love to see better local health care, primary care doctors, health centers that are open longer, people who eat. I've been working on food from day one. Seniors did not have food. There were seniors all across this borough and this city who were almost starving, and that I couldn't see. So we immediately went into action with Fresh Direct and everyone else trying to get food to the seniors. We now had 1.1 million New Yorkers who were, as they say, food insecure. Is now up to 2.2 million New Yorkers out of 8.4 who are food insecure. And so how do we, as a lesson learned, it is insane for a city like us in this country to have people who are starving. So how do we redo and have healthier food? You know, we're very fortunate on the Upper West Side with the restaurants and the grocery stores and so on and so forth. But how do we deal with the places in our city that don't have all of that? And there are a lot of them. So I would say healthcare to be improved, racial situation to be improved, police community to be improved, and certainly we have to figure out the food situation. I always find housing to be very challenging, but that is a place where people get sick if they're overcrowded, and so many New Yorkers are overcrowded because the rent's so high. So I don't know if those are lessons learned, but there's some of them.
Is there an opportunity? You know, we were talking about how so often when you look back at history at these times of crisis, something in hindsight comes out where we have an opportunity to do something, a big idea, something dramatic, and we look back in hindsight and say, boy, that was really transformative. Is there an opportunity here for the city to do something big coming out of this?
Well, I would love to see, you know, just the streetscape, if in fact we're healthier with less cars and trucks? Could the trucks be healthier? That means a different truck. And could the streets be more open for pedestrians and the restaurants? Could we be more of an outdoor city where we are healthier? You know, a lot of these schools don't have gyms. A lot of us don't exercise. And how do you make us healthier? Now, I have a crazy friend who was the borough president of Brooklyn, Eric Adams, and I have to give him credit. He actually beat diabetes by switching his diet. Now, but he is conscious about it, very, very conscientious. But in the fast food, as somebody said, there's too many fast food restaurants and there's too many liquor stores and not enough fresh fruits and vegetables at affordable prices. How do you double the SNAP eligibility in terms of the amount that it gives you on every single card, as an example? So, there are all of these nuanced things. So if we talk about a big idea, I guess I would say, how do we become healthy in the best sense of the word? Not just the primary care doctor, but how do we eat healthier? How do we have healthier apartments? How do we have less pollution because of the cars and the trucks? Or how do we, but these are hard things but when you see how many people died and they had underlying conditions, then you say to yourself, well, why do they have underlying conditions? And the answer is not just as easy as they couldn't get to the doctor or they didn't have insurance, which is some of it, but it's also how we live our lives. And, it's not necessarily made easy in terms of what's available in your community or what the message is. In school, like the other small thing to come out of this, which is somebody said the other day, I have been swamped. So I have not been cooking. I'm not going to say I have been, but there are tons of people who have been cooking. So now, and the Catherine Garcia, who's the food czar, I love her. She says she knows people are cooking because she got all these messages and nobody could find flour. So, you do need to think that, okay, so here we are. What came out of this? Well, maybe more people will buy ingredients and cook. So they're not going to the fast food restaurant and they're not eating unhealthy food. But, it's hard. How do you get rid of the unhealthy restaurants? I would love to. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think health in the largest sense of the word, and there's so many aspects to it, that's what we need to think of.
I really appreciate that answer, and I think you're 100% right about that. And Manhattan Borough President Brewer, we really thank you so much for your time tonight and your valuable insights into these, as you said, complicated issues. And thank you to everyone who's logged in to listen to us tonight. We hope you found tonight's forum interesting and informative. For more information on upcoming sessions, please follow us on Twitter or Facebook, or check out our website, saferstreetsny.org. Borough President Brewer, thank you again. And good night to everyone. Thank you. Did you want to say a closing?
I just want to say thank you. And then my number is 212-669-8191. That goes right to my cell phone. And of course, you can find us just gBrewer@manhattanbp.nyc.gov. And we're glad to follow up in any way. And thank you very much. The questions are excellent. And it's wonderful just to have a relaxed conversation as opposed to so many other ones I have to have.
Well, we appreciate you answering our questions. So, okay, everybody, good night. Stay safe. And we look forward to seeing you back at our next forum, which I believe is tomorrow night. So please sign up. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.